So, colleagues, please let me shortly introduce our next speaker, Natalia Vasilevich. She will be speaking about the Russian Orthodox Church in different political contexts and the war in Ukraine. Natalia was born in Minsk and currently is living in Germany. Her specialization is Orthodox Church in today's world, and she studied political science and law. And I would like also to mention that she is involved not only in the economical movement and dialogues, but she is also a moderator of something called Christian Vision, which is actually movement for democratic improvement of the democracy in Belarus. So thank you very much, and I pass the floor. If you want to comment on this shortly, you can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, after hearing other presentations, I decided a little bit to reshape mine because yes, it will be the same but little bit reshaped because I understood more what is the project about. And first I would like to say a few words about Christian Vision. Christian Vision for Belarus. It's a group of Christians of different churches in Belarus who came together in 2020, in August 2020, during the revival, national revival or democratic revival against the authoritarian regime of Lukashenko. And it was like a spontaneous move to monitor the situation in Belarus, and we still are there and try to work with political prisoners, with democratic movement to explain them what churches are about, how they should speak with church leaders and communicate with church leaders, and also we try to speak with ecumenical movement, churches to raise awareness about Belarus, and of course provide churches with expertise and about democracy, like trying to be linked between democratic movement and churches and religious communities in Belarus. Here I brought books we published. It's one of our project, letters to Vatican by political prisoners, relatives of political prisoners, letter of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. So Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, a democratic leader of Belarus, was the first political leader in the world to respond to Fratelli Tutti. And you can find also here her response to Fratelli Tutti, and asking Pope that he explains how do we apply the encyclical, very nice encyclical, we agree with every word, but please explain us now how can be applied in concrete situation of Belarus. Give us advices. Still, and why it's knocking at Vatican's door, because the doors are still closed and we don't have any responses from Vatican, Pope or the Holy See on our requests. So you can take this book and see about our work. And after 24th of February, Christian Vision reoriented its activities to in solidarity with Ukraine, with Ukrainian churches, and also with those Russian religious activists, priests who are against the war. So now we more or less, although we are still focused on Belarus, but we have a project, Christians Against War, which unites Christians in Belarus, Russia and Ukraine to address the issues of war, of justice, peace, and probably future reconciliation, and to think what can we do in a present situation. But first I would like to speak about the Russian Orthodox Church. And when I say Russian Orthodox Church, I think it's very important to understand, and what media is often misuse also, that it's top hierarchs who are made to be representatives of the church, while there are communities, hierarchs or people, priests on grassroots level, which do not accept the same ideas. And what happened now, because the situation with the war is such morally distinct, that it influenced very much the dynamic inside the church. So before, even if many people were not agreeing with hierarchs, the degree of tolerance to what hierarchs say or do was still quite high. People were not agreeing, but still could tolerate it. Okay, we can live with this, we don't agree, but still we can live with this. But now, what happens, the more hierarchs are promoting the war, more people who were before in a moderate opposition start to be in very strong opposition to the hierarchy of the church. So there is this kind of really big polarization inside. But one of things which I wanted to mention also, and it's about ecumenical movement. I was participating in the General Assembly of the World Council of Churches, and I was involved in producing document on Ukrainian war and war in Ukraine. And I was working together with a priest from the Russian church in the same team, who were promoting his own view to this issue. So I know very well the discourse and all the strategies, communicative strategies, how the Russian church trying to promote the discourse of the Putin's regime. And what was very much interesting for me, why the majority, I would say the majority in the World Council of Churches was rather siding with Russian church. That's why very often it was silently, but still you could see that among Latin American churches, among Middle East churches, among African churches, there was a lot of kind of understanding of position of the Russian church. And I find it very interesting, the dynamic, also because when we see Patriarch Kirill and his comments about the war in Ukraine, in Eastern Europe and Central Europe, we understand it's in a paradigm of imperialism. Imperialism, which is trying to expand Great Russia and dominate neighboring countries, which were experienced many of us in our history. But in reality, you will never find Patriarch Kirill speaking in imperialistic paradigm. What paradigm he uses is liberation theology and anti-colonialism narrative, which is very much used in and has it sounded for WCC especially. It's very important narratives. So I have an article about analyzing, then I better send it, not go into details because we do not have time, but you know the document basis of social doctrine of the Russian church, which was accepted in 2000, in the year 2000. So this document was very much accepted by the ecumenical audience, by the Catholic Church, as a first example of Orthodox social doctrine, and it was rather as a positive moment of development of theology in the Russian church. And Patriarch Kirill, I want also to remind, I don't know if you know his story, but when he was elected, the ecumenical audience was happy because he was considered to be pro-Western, liberal, and even liberal, ecumenically open, and so on. So that was the image that it was the wing which was more moderate and liberal, which got the power in the church with the election of Patriarch Kirill. But if you see this discourse, and that's why it's very interesting how it goes together. But it goes together with these narratives, manipulative narratives of liberation from oppression. So what, and if you go to this document, so this document has a part War and Peace, and in this part it speaks about the war as evil and the concept of just war and so on. And many those who try to do analysis of the Russian Orthodox social doctrine go to, if they want to know about the war, they go to the chapter which is called War and Peace. It's logically, but in the whole document, there are other parts, and I suppose maybe different people were writing different parts. And one part is about church and state. And in this part, the church strictly forbids to priests and church structures to cooperate with state when state starts civil war or wages aggressive war. So it's written like completely unacceptable, and it's forbidden to cooperate. So it's always very good to cooperate with state, but when state starts war, so no. We say no to the state. But there is another chapter which is on church and nation. And in this chapter, there is an explanation what is patriotism. What is patriotism, how the church should behave in patriotism, and there you find the concept of liberation war, which liberation war also for our region and for Eastern Europe and for Central Europe and for, I don't know, so the countries, we all were under empires at a certain point. We were rediscovering our identity, liberating from empires. Very often, as that was seen, is liberation from oppression. And that's exactly how so these people who die for freedom, people who die for their neighbor fighting for freedom, they are presented in this doctrine as martyrs, as saints who are intercessors for us before God. So all the passages, you can see them in the written form. And so that's why this war is framed by Patriarch Kirill as a liberation war. Because he sees the world order is unjust world order. With domination of Anglo-Saxons or America, NATO, gay lobby, and so on, some forces which try to impose something bad and try to dominate. And so that's, of course, there is no subjectivity of Ukraine, but it's subjectivity of Holy Rus, which need to be somehow liberated from this oppression of the West. And that's how it's framed, and it finds understanding among many anti-Western narratives, both for African churches, in the Middle East churches, and also in the West, those churches who, for example, do not like militarization and they think NATO, expanding of NATO is something bad. So these churches also in the West, they support Russian church and their narratives about the roots of this war. So when, and what is also interesting, he never uses idea of just peace, just war. Patriarch Kirill very often speaks about just peace. He says what we do now, we want peace. It's not we who, we are just defending ourselves and so on. So when often he's confronted with anti-imperialist stance, it's not productive because that's something different, some different frames which he tries to use. Yeah, so I wanted also to show, like I've had some postcards, that's project Orthodox Against War, with white rose as an anti-fascist, anti-Nazi German movement where Orthodox were also active about the white rose. So there are many different groups in Russia. You probably heard also about the letter of 293 priests against the war. So that's this process is really like this polarization is going on because now also the hierarchy tries to silence those who are opposing. It produces even more polarization, and I think at a certain point it will reframe Russian church completely, like it happened already, almost happened in Belarus. Why the example of Belarus is important? Because Belarus is the same as Russia, is authoritarian state, authoritarian regime. It is also involved in this regional dynamic of the war in Ukraine because the territory of Belarus was provided by Lukashenko to Russia to invade Ukraine. And the interesting thing is that the 2020 already changed the dynamic inside the Orthodox Church because the revival, this national upheaval and civic upheaval started to somehow influence also church people. And so the church people could also influence the hierarchs. I want to tell you that two hierarchs of the Belarusian Orthodox Church, one, the main hierarch, Metropolitan Pavel of Minsk, who under influence of people visited those who were tortured in prison, and also spoke with people trying to calm them, not to be very aggressive, and so on. After 2 weeks, after 9 of August, when the revival started, when the mass protest started, he left the country because the regime tried to remove him. That means what he was saying, what he was doing was not in what the regime was interested in, so they removed. And the second hierarch, Archbishop Artemy of Grodno, he was outspoken. So he was outspoken against the regime of Lukashenko, and even if he was Moscow Patriarchate, Russian Orthodox, and so on, he still took the side of people, and he said, we need fair elections, we need no violence, no breaking of law by the law enforcement agency. So he was very often, on many occasions, he was speaking against the authoritarian regime. And he was also removed finally. But the people in the churches, they were somehow fueled by these mass protests, and priests and simple believers, they started to be involved very much in the protests. And what I would like also to mention, very interesting thing, the place of women. Why these protests, both in the churches and in society, was framed as a female protests, because female, it's in patriarchal society. Belarus politically was very patriarchal society, and women were not considered to be powerful enough to be a threat. And finally, the regime didn't fight with women because they even didn't know that they should fight with them. The same in the church. So we have a lot of female theologians who were not even considered to be a threat. They cannot take any position in the church. They cannot be priests, they cannot be bishops, so they cannot do anything And so for quite a long time, these groups of people are not seen as threat, not seen as a possibility of being powerful. By the way, it's also Orthodox nun started this project, Sister Vasilevich in Vienna, who is now in Vienna. So the church authorities also didn't see women as a threat, and it gave a long time, quite a long time, for them to form groups, to exchange competences, to exchange resources, and I would say that even Christian Vision, it's a very female group, because we have a lot of female theologians who are concerned and who do not have power in a certain sense in the structure of the church, neither of Catholic Church nor of Orthodox Church, but who are not also hostages of the power structures. So in the same time, there is an access to media, for example, where so I don't think that power or authorities only can be based on this being involved and somehow incorporated in the power structures, but it can be, for example, being independent voice in media could frame the society understanding of Christianity, of churches, and so on. Yeah. So I think I will stop on this point. Just to say the last probably thing, that if we see the reactions, so we monitor the reactions of coming from different parts of the Orthodox Church, and we see that depending on the political context, the reactions are different. So depending on the society, the reactions are different. And I think it will lead to, how to say, the Russian church will at some point be fragmented, and there will be, we will never see anymore super powerful Russian church as an international player, an international subject. It will dissolve at a certain point, as already Ukraine was completely lost. So, yeah. Okay, yeah.